Okay, now you've heard me mention a few times, the real claim to history in this area was because of the ox cart trails crossing the Cheyenne River here. This is the Cheyenne River, and here's where they crossed. Now, there was always a big debate about the location of the crossing, partly because this river changes a lot. But it's kind of funny how I figured out where it was in the end. I printed out, I had the original survey map that showed plainly where the trail was located, and I printed out transparencies of current maps and everything, pile them up until I was able to, and keep modifying the size of the map until I was able to get the section lines to line up. And this is the spot it showed. And then after I had, the problem is that the trail has been farmed over on this side, and for quite a few years. But once I got it established, the area that it is, I went out here and walked around, and to this day, this has never been farmed back in here. And you run into the two wagon ruts that still go there. And there's nothing back here. There's, that has to be what they're for. They head right down to the river. If you go a little north of here too, the map shows that there was a cabin back in here, but I have never been able to find trace of that, so I'm afraid that's out into the field more, because I haven't been able to find that. But on the other side, on the south side, you go just a little bit further south, and that's where there was a lot of building activity. But this was the main crossing. In high water, they had a ferry they would run across. Now, I don't have any pictures of the actual ferry they used here, but I do have one of the one that was used at Fort Abercrombie across the Red, and it's pretty much the same thing. So I'll put that in here so you can have an idea of what it was like, but that one was from on the Red. But the Cheyenne here, like say, if you're up in a corner like that, which is going to be deeper than snot in the corner, but if you got a straightaway, when the Cheyenne goes down, in spring, you'd have to use a ferry. But when the Cheyenne drops, you could just ford across. There's many places you can walk across. It's like knee deep and hard sand bottom. So it's easy going. But in high water, then the water is way up to where we're standing and over that. In fact, there's probably about 6 feet deep here a couple of years ago. At least 6 feet deep. Right here. So, we move a lot of water through here. But this is where it was all at. This was the important thing in the area. Our claim to fame. And like I say, it was the ox cart trail, but then even after the ox carts quit traveling, though I'll stick in a picture of the ox carts too, because I did find a picture in the Historical Society, and I'll put that in here so you can get an idea of them, and then you imagine 200 of them trying to cross. But after that too, then the military used it for a long, long time. Okay, one of the first, or surviving of the first buildings that was around here, a lot of them got tore down, but we've got one that's still surviving that's been moved around, was originally back over there and has been moved into the yard here, and I'll show you that in a second because there's some interesting aspects to it. But at one time I had mentioned that there was wheat grown, some of the first wheat in the area was grown down here. Now you see this big open plain down here. Well, it's not real big, but it was big if you're plowing with a horse. This was where the first wheat was grown in the area, and then hauled into Fort Abercrombie on a sled to be ground. But I'll bring up wheat later, because wheat plays a big part in the valley. But right now, somebody was just glad to have bread. But now I'll show you that other cabin, and there's some aspects of it I want you to see. Okay, this is real old. Now you can see the marks where the logs were hewn somewhat flat. And they used that V-type saddle notch again. But the most interesting aspect of this is the walls are not up and down. They are out both ways, all four directions. And that's a thing that I've only seen in Scandinavian countries. The idea was by having the logs hose out a little bit, it protected the chinking in between the logs because you're using like plate, you know. But it's the only one like that I know of around here, but I've seen them in like Sweden and Norway. But it's old. And you notice too, you know, the roof has been replaced, but they put a pretty steep pitched roof on them always to shed snow. But like I say, this one has all been replaced because it was actually used for a granary for a while. Okay, here we're back to that where they do the, you know, big logs flattened out, elaborate dovetail joints. And here's something I haven't seen before. They put a lot of these spacer blocks in between the logs to stabilize it. And also they used big wooden oak pins that went between them. That was different. But you got 2 stories. You know, nicely built. But there again, it's been moved. It came from a little bit, like a quarter mile west of this spot, but was moved in. But there again, I suspect that's when it was built by those logging crews out of Minnesota. Just because of the sheer size of the logs. Okay, now this one too, it was at one time had wooden siding over it, you know, just to make it look like a frame house. But also on the inside it was with lath and plaster. But you know, this one you can see some of the corner joints are deteriorating on it because, well, here would be part of the problem. When they replace the roof, it doesn't have enough overhang. They should actually have more overhang than that. And the old guys would have known that, but that roof is newer. Okay, I kind of pride myself on knowing what things are, where things are around here. And this is one that has always puzzled me. It's like a cabin that was about 12 by 12. You know, and it's got the nicely dovetailed joints and stuff. But it has never, I can never find a record of it on any of the plot maps, any on the survey maps. There's just nothing there. So and it was, you know, there again, at one time the logs were covered with board. But it's a mystery to me. And it's actually along a fairly main road, you know, like I keep talking about that ox cart trail that went east and west. Well, this is the north-south road. You know, the south one goes by my place. The north one from the crossing goes toward civilization. And it was a major road, and somebody was living here, and I can find no record of it. It's interesting. This is from a different angle on it. So you would see. I mean, these were bought in boards. You know, they're tongue and groove, so that was put on later. But these logs are about hewn down to about 8 inches thick. Yeah, just really puzzling. Here again, it would be interesting to use a metal detector and see what's laying around here. Well, probably a hell of a lot of nails, but it's funny. I've just never been able to get a good story on who it would have been.